This is an interview with Carrie Hamilton Locke for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's Oral History Project. I'm Horace Huntley. We're at Miles College. Today is October 18, 1995. Thank you, Mrs. Locke, for coming out to sit with us today to talk about the movement.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We know that you were a young person during the time of the struggle, and what we're trying to do is sort of piece together this story of Birmingham and the movement. But first, I would like to just start by asking you some sort of general questions about your family.
Okay.
Just a couple of things about your parents. Where are your parents from?
My parents are both from Birmingham, Alabama. I was born and raised in the Rising area, which is most notably for Rickwood Ballpark is the area.
Yes. And your parents were born in Birmingham, and you were born in Birmingham. Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I did. I have an older sister, Cheryl. Then I'm the second in line, Carrie. My brother, William. My brother, Bernard, and my sister, Nancy.
Does all of them still live in Birmingham?
Everybody lives here except Nancy.
Oh, okay. Where does Nancy live?
Nancy lives in Illinois.
Oh, okay. Just tell me just a bit about your parents. How much education did they have? Did they go to high school and to college?
My mother and father both went to Parker High School, and my father was a minister. He was minister at First Baptist Church in Inslee. He also worked and retired from the U.S. Postal Service. He was a mail handler here in Birmingham and retired after 20-something years.
I see. Did your mother work outside of the home?
My mother did work outside of the home. She worked as a nurse, and she was involved in our child rearing. But I would have to say that my father was an early Mr. Mom. He took care of the kids. He did the cooking, he did the washing, he did the ironing.
So you sort of laid the foundation for me, because I was one of those house husbands for a while myself. Tell me a bit about your education. Where did you start first grade, for instance?
I started first grade at Brighton Elementary School, and I went there for the first and the second grade. I can remember my first grade teacher was Mrs. Austin. You
seem as if you remember Mrs. Austin, have fond memories of her.
I have all fond memories of my childhood.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And you moved from Brighton, and then what school did you attend? To
Princeton Elementary School.
Okay. And Princeton, was Princeton an integrated school at the time?
No, it was all black at the time.
Okay.
Princeton School remains in 1995 to be a premier elementary school now. And during the time that I went to school, it was a very good school, and the community was always involved. We had a principal, Miss Lucille Boyd, Ms. Boyd, Miss Catherine Smith, our teachers. They were all involved with the kids. I had no idea that we were poor, because back then everything was based on integrity instead of money. So my parents had plenty of integrity. I thought we were rich.
And maybe you were, in comparison. Tell me just a bit about your community, the community of Rising. How do you remember Rising as a child growing up in that community?
The foremost thing that I remember about Rising, that it was 4 blocks east and west and 4 blocks north and south. And so that was our world. We had 4 blocks by 4 blocks, and we were a very closely knit community. All of the parents knew each other. My parents worked. Both of my parents worked all the time. My mother and father would leave very early and come back very late, but all the neighbors were in charge of us, so that if anything happened, rest assured the neighbors were going to tell.
What kind of occupations did your neighbors have? Do you remember what kind of work was done by most of the people in the community?
During the 50s and the 60s, neighbors would be the gamut of teachers, nurses, nurses' aides, domestics, proud domestics, the people that I knew as portermen were proud people. They had worked to send their children to whatever schooling that they were going to go through, business schooling at that time. I just remember a dignified lifestyle during that time.
You went to Parker High School initially, is that correct?
Yes, 9th grade.
Tell me about that experience. Why did you decide to go to Parker High School?
Because I was spoiled. My grandmother and grandfather lived in the Smithfield area. And at my grandmother's house, I had my own room. I had all the privileges that an only child has. My grandfather was a minister, and he always wore a black suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. And he would take me to school and have me sit in the back. And he would get out and come around the side. It was like I had a chauffeur. So, of course, all the kids thought we were rich. And, of course, we were not. But everybody thought that my grandfather was my chauffeur.
This is at Parker?
This is at Parker.
Okay.
And when we got out at 3 or 3:30 or whatever time school let out, he would stand on the sidewalk and stand there very proud, open the door and stand and wait for me to get in. I felt like a princess.
Mm-hmm. Where was your older sister?
They were at home.
Okay. She was out of school already?
No, my older sister is only, she's less than 2 years older than I am. So she was at Parker, yes.
Okay, but she lived with your mother and father, and you lived with the grandparents?
Well, just for a little while. When I would get mad at my parents, I would go to my grand. Just like kids are today.
Okay, playing the ends against the middle.
That's right. I was real good at it.
After your 9th grade at Parker, tell me, what do you remember about Parker as a school?
I remember fun times. I remember that coming from Princeton Elementary School, which is a very small school, and going to Parker, I thought, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. It was so big, it was so huge, I was such an adult. I just thought this was the greatest thing in the world. Most of the people there knew my parents. The teachers knew my dad and my mom. So we couldn't get away with anything because people would call your parents then. You didn't dare get in trouble because that would just be the end of it. I felt very special there. I worked for the principal, so I had my own principal's pass. My teachers were very good. I was freshman representative to the student council, so I got a chance to go to assembly on a weekly basis and stand on the stage. That was very important.
So you were a very active person in your formative years.
I suppose, but back then I didn't think so. I mean, you don't think about it. It wasn't conscious.
You were a freshman at Parker in 1963.
1963, that's correct.
During the demonstration.
Yes.
Were your parents actively involved in the movement?
Yes, they were. My parents would go to the mass meetings at 16th Street Baptist Church. My father was minister. My grandfather was minister. And at that time, all ministers were focal characters in the movement. They kept the community abreast of what would be going on and what should be going on. But I think the thing that I remember the most about Parker High School was standing in the principal's office when Kennedy was killed, and back to back to back to back, so many people were dying. I was always a kid that was interested in the news. I liked...
What do you mean back to back to back people were dying?
People were dying in Mississippi. I remember when Medgar Evers was killed. I remember when the 3 civil rights workers died in Mississippi. Miss Lucio. Yes. I remember that as a child. I remember when Denise McNair, Addie Collins, the other girls were killed at 16th Street Baptist Church.
How did that impact upon you as a young person, the bombing of 16th Street Baptist Church?
If I can remember, it was on a early September morning, on Sunday morning in September. And the blast shook our house, even though we lived very far away. And the news came by telephone. People ran out in the streets. They were screaming. They were hollering.
What community did you live in when the bomb?
I lived by Rickwood Ballpark. I lived in the Rising. Yeah.
Okay.
But it shook our house. And everybody wondered, what is it? What in the world? It was so loud. And then we were told what had happened. Nobody could believe it, because the civil rights era was one thing, but murder was something else. And I could remember that the young Wesley girl, her father had been my teacher, my principal at Princeton Elementary School. And Chris McNair had taught at Parker. So these were people that I knew, if not the children, I knew their parents, or I knew who their parents were. It was utter disbelief. Nobody believed that even white people were so low down, so hateful, so spiteful, that they would kill children. And after they did kill the children, they weren't sorry.
How did that, what kind of impression did that leave on you about white people in general? Did you look at white people in general, or did you look at this as an isolated case?
No, it was not isolated, because we were very, as children, we were very aware of whites. We were very aware of the 2 worlds that we lived in, the black world, the white world. My parents always had Ebony magazine around, and Jet magazine, and we understood. We knew about Emmett Till, the man that had been, the young boy that had been killed and his body mutilated. We knew about lynchings. We were very aware of how black people disappeared, never to be heard of again. How black men would be shot in the back, walking the streets, and the police would say they were shot in self-defense because these people were robbing or killing. We were very aware of the terrible things that were happening in the black community. But as children, we were not afraid.